I wake up every morning at 6, a habit developed over decades, stronger than age. While others my age are complaining about insomnia or, conversely, fighting the urge to stay in bed until lunchtime, my internal clock works perfectly. 6 hours and I'm up and about, regardless of the weather, day of the week, or how I feel. My name is Rowan Barrington. I'm 73 years old, a widower, and the owner of Barrington Antiques, a small but highly respected business in Greenfield. Nothing impressive to the outsider's eye, just an antique shop in the old part of town. But to those in the know, it's a place of power where collectors from all over the East Coast come to visit. After waking up, I do some simple calisthenics, nothing too complicated, stretching, a few bends and squats. Then I take a shower, always finishing with cold water. I dress carefully, good pants, a shirt, sometimes a tie, even if I'm not going out. My late wife Yvette always said that a man should dress with respect for himself, and I have kept that tradition even 11 years after her passing. Breakfast is the same: oatmeal on water, toast with a little butter, a cup of strong tea. During breakfast, I watch the news on my tablet. I have mastered modern technology without difficulty, to the surprise of many, including my son Elliot. For some reason, he thinks a man my age should be afraid of anything with a screen and buttons. Perhaps he's just comfortable thinking that way. At 8 o'clock, I'm already at my shop. Even though we technically open at 10, those 2 hours are the most productive of my day. I'm checking new arrivals, answering emails, planning auction strategies. My business has long since outgrown the confines of a simple antique shop. Barrington Antiques is a network of connections around the world, participating in major auctions and consulting for museums and private collectors. In the digital age, the physical location of a business matters less and less, and a small greenfield no longer limits my options. By 10 o'clock, Pearl Overholt, my assistant for the past 15 years, arrives. An amazing woman of 62 with a phenomenal memory for detail and the handwriting of a calligrapher. In a world obsessed with youth, many people wonder why I don't hire someone younger. The answer's simple. Loyalty and experience are more valuable than youth and ambition. Pearl knows the histories of all the significant items that have passed through our hands, remembers the habits and preferences of each regular customer. "Good morning, Mr. Barrington," she says, hanging her coat on the hook by the door. "Mr. Inskip called about that amber box. He's offering 1,000 more." "Tell him we've already given Mrs. Whittingham our word," I reply, not even looking up from the catalog. "A fair deal is worth more than extra profit," Pearl smiles. She knew my answer before she even asked the question. But that's our ritual. Some things don't change, and I find a certain comfort in that. The day runs its course. Regular customers come in, sometimes tourists attracted by a sign or a recommendation from a guidebook. I let Pearl handle most of the visitors. I retire to my office where I research and negotiate with suppliers and auction houses. Over lunch, I usually review the news of the auction world. Sometimes I call my old friend Bertram Hopper. I met him at university, and he is the only one of my peers who is still active. Bertram is an Asian art specialist, and our professional paths often cross. "Have you heard the news?" he asked today. "Caulfield's heirs have decided to put his collection up for sale." "Really?" I lean back in my chair. "I thought the youngest wanted to keep it all." "I guess financial considerations outweighed it," Bertram sighs. "You know, looking at situations like this, I appreciate your approach more and more." He's referring to my strategy for protecting a collection that only a few of my closest friends know about. I smile but don't develop the topic. Even with Bertram, there are things I prefer to keep quiet about. After 5 o'clock, Pearl leaves, and I often stay until 7 or 8 in the evening. Paperwork, planning future acquisitions, sometimes secret meetings with confidants. In the antiques business, reputation and confidentiality are most important, especially when it comes to items with questionable ownership history or political significance. When I get home, I cook myself a simple dinner. Sometimes I watch documentaries or listen to classical music. Yvette loves Chopin, and now every time his nocturnes are played, I feel her invisible presence close by. My life may seem lonely, but it's not. I've simply learned to appreciate solitude. After a noisy childhood with a large family and a tumultuous youth, I find peace in the quiet of my home. Today that peace is broken by a phone call. The name Elliot pops up on my smartphone screen, and I feel my shoulders involuntarily tense. My only son rarely calls, and it usually means trouble. Yeah. Hey, Dad. His voice sounds strangely chipper. How are you feeling? Fine, I answer with restraint. Did something happen? Why happened? He laughs. I just wanted to see how you were doing. I know that tone. It's what he used to say when he was a kid, when he broke a vase or got an F. It's what he used to say when he was young, asking for money for some dubious scheme. It's what he said when he came to apologize after missing his mother's funeral because of a party in Ibiza. I've known you for 39 years, Elliot. Get to the point. Pause. I hear him sigh. Okay, remember Lorelei? We decided to start a business together. A small cafe downtown with organic food and everything. It's very promising right now. Lorelei is his fourth wife, or is it his fifth? I lost count. Young woman with the looks of a model and the ambition of a chef. They met at a cooking class that Elliot was taking as part of his next self-discovery. And you need money, I conclude. Not really. I mean, yes, but for a reason. It's an investment, Dad. We made a business plan, we found a space. It's not like the old days. The old days included a surf school in Florida, closed after 3 months, importing exotic fruit from South America, failed due to customs issues, a yoga studio turned into a party place, and a dozen other ventures like that. How many, wait, I ask, knowing it's useless, but curious to hear the number. 200,000, he answers as casually as if he were asking for change for coffee. 250 at the most. We'll pay it all back with interest in a year, maybe a year and a half. In my mind, I calculate how much he already owes me. It's close to $1 million if you include all the investments, loans, and temporary financial difficulties of the last 15 years. No, I say calmly. What? I said no. I don't have that kind of money for you. Dad, come on. I know how much you have in your accounts. Your business. My business is my business, I interrupted him. And I don't have to fund your whims. Whims? His voice rises. I'm trying to build something worthwhile. Lorelei and I have serious plans. Like that yoga studio? Or the fruit importation? That's not fair. I learned from my mistakes. 40 years is a little late for an apprenticeship, don't you think? There's a pause. I hear him take a deep breath, trying to control his irritation. Okay, he finally says. I was hoping we could work this out amicably, but since you don't want to help your own son, I've been helping you your whole life, Elliot. College, first apartment, weddings, divorce, more divorce. The list is endless. And now you're gonna stop? How long do you have left, Dad? 10 years? 15? Are you gonna take it all with you to the grave? That's the real reason for the call. Not so much a request for money, but a reminder of my mortality and his expectations of his inheritance. My son is a patient predator, waiting for the right moment to attack. Perhaps, I replied. Good night, Elliot. I hang up without waiting for an answer. My hands are shaking slightly, but not from fear or anger. It's more from the realization that I've made the right decision. Standing up from my chair, I walk over to the bookshelf and pull out an old photo album. On one of the first pages is a picture of little Elliot, smiling a toothless smile. He's about 5 years old and he's holding a model ship that he and I built together. This was before money and status became more important to him than relationships. Before he turned into someone I don't recognize or understand. As I flip through the pages of the album, I can see how his face gradually changed from open childlike joy to teenage sullenness, and then to the mask of smugness and pretense he wears now. The last picture of us together was taken at Yvette's funeral. Elliot is standing next to me, his hand on my shoulder in a gesture of support, but his eyes are already wandering somewhere off to the side, searching for something or someone more interesting. He was late for the service and left right after the burial, citing an emergency. Closing the album, I return it to the shelf and walk over to the secretary. Behind the false back of the top drawer is a safe with documents no one knows exist, including my notary. Documents that changed the structure of my property and assets in a way that protected them from the greed of the sole heir. I was not a naive parent turning a blind eye to my child's shortcomings. I saw what my son was becoming and took the necessary steps. The country house he often asked about, the collection of antiques he'd already mentally sold off, the bank accounts he'd counted on, all protected by a complex system of trusts and endowments in the name of people who had proven themselves loyal and trustworthy. Pearl Overholt, her son Quentin, Bertram Hopper, their families, and a few others whose names were never mentioned in Elliot's presence are my true heirs. People who share my values and respect the labor put into creating what Elliot so flippantly considers his future fortune. Today's call only confirmed the correctness of my decision. I had long suspected that Elliot's patience was wearing thin. His attempts to extort large sums of money were becoming more and more persistent, and his interest in my health less and less genuine. I returned to my chair and poured myself a small brandy. Difficult times lie ahead. I sense that Elliot's next move will be more decisive. Perhaps he'll try to challenge my legal capacity or find another way to gain control of what he considers his birthright. But I'm ready for it. The defense plan has been years in the making, every detail thought out and vetted by the best lawyers. The upcoming battle will be my last, and I intend to win it, no matter what it takes. Today I decided to take apart Yvette's old desk. 11 years have passed since her death, and I've still been putting it off. Not out of sentimentality, more out of respect for her personal space, which she valued so much in her lifetime. Pulling out the top drawer, I discover stacks of letters tied with faded ribbons. Some are from me, from the beginning of our acquaintance. Yvette had even kept the short notes I'd left her before business trips. Others from her parents, sister, college friends, and a whole stack from Elliot, mostly postcards from resorts and notes from school teachers, which she kept for some reason. Beneath the letters, I find a worn leather diary. Flipping through the pages, written in Yvette's neat handwriting, I stop at an entry dated May 20th, 1985. Elliot turned 4 today. Rowan gave him a wooden boat that he made himself. Elliot cried. He wanted a toy tank like Tommy Preston's. Why doesn't our son ever appreciate the things he puts his heart into? Rowan tried not to show disappointment, but I know he spent the whole weekend working on that boat. In the evening, when Elliot was asleep, I found the boat abandoned in the garden. I brought it into the house, put it on his shelf. Maybe someday he'll realize the value of such gifts. I remember that day. I remember the disappointment I really tried to hide. I remember the years that followed, when every gift or lesson I gave was met with the same disdain. Flipping further, I find an entry from September 1991. Elliot's first day at a private school. Rowan thought public school would be enough, but I insisted. I want him to have every opportunity, every door open. He's such a smart boy. Just needs the right environment. Today he saw other students' parents' cars for the first time and immediately declared that our car was not cool enough. Where does that come from in a 10-year-old? I closed the diary, feeling the memories come in waves. Yvette was always defending Elliot, always finding excuses for his actions. It wasn't that she was blind to his faults, just that she saw them as temporary manifestations that would fade with age. I was less optimistic. Our son grew up in an atmosphere of contradiction. I tried to instill in him the values of hard work, patience, and respect for others' efforts. Yvette, who came from a more affluent family, believed that a child should have whatever he asked for, especially if we could afford it. She saw nothing wrong with spoiling him, fulfilling his every whim. "He's a kid, Rowan," she'd say when I objected to yet another expensive toy or gadget. "He should have a better childhood than we had." My childhood wasn't easy. The third of 5 children in a plumber's family, I knew the value of money and labor from an early age. University, on scholarship and part-time jobs. My first business, from scratch with no startup capital. I wanted Elliot to understand that success is the result of hard work, not a gift from fate. Yvette saw things differently. Growing up in a family with a strong financial position, she believed that it was the duty of parents to protect their children from any difficulties and hardships. She truly believed that material security would automatically lead to happiness and moral development. We loved each other, but we never agreed on parenting. As a result, Elliot learned to manipulate both of us by playing on our differences. If I refused a whim, he would go to his mother, knowing that she could not resist his requests. If Yvette tried to set any limits, he would turn to me, portraying a sudden understanding of the value of labor and responsibility. By Elliot's teenage years, this game had become a real art form. He instinctively sensed which buttons to push, which words to use to get what he wanted. Yvette saw this as a sign of intelligence and social adaptability. I saw it as the rudiments of manipulative and parasitic behavior. The school years only reinforced my fears. Elliot was never a diligent student, preferring socialization to learning. His grades remained mediocre, despite his obvious ability. Teachers often commented that he could have achieved more if he had put in a little effort. But why try when his dad's checkbook was always ready to pay for tutors, summer school, and charitable donations that guaranteed promotion to the next grade? After college, which he graduated with the minimum acceptable grades, a period of finding himself began. The search usually involved exotic travel, questionable business ideas, and a series of relationships with women whose names I had trouble remembering. Each new hobby required a financial injection. Each failure was explained by unfavorable circumstances or the intrigues of competitors. I realized that Yvette and I were responsible for the way our son grew up. My attempts at discipline were inconsistent and easily circumvented by Yvette's intervention. Her desire to give him the best was not matched by demands for responsibility and gratitude. As a result, we raised a man convinced of his right to a comfortable life provided by the efforts of others. When Yvette became ill, I hoped it would be a turning point for Elliot, that the sight of his mother fading away would make him reconsider his attitude toward life, toward family, toward money, that he would finally grow up and take some responsibility. I was wrong. During her illness, he showed up at the hospital sporadically, always finding convincing reasons for his absence. Business meetings, business trips, transportation problems. His arsenal of excuses was inexhaustible. Yvette defended him to her last breath. It's hard for him to see me like this. He's a very sensitive boy, always has been. On the day of the funeral, he was late for the service. He came in with red eyes, but not from tears, from lack of sleep after the party. I found out later, from a mutual acquaintance who happened to mention that he had seen Elliot at the club the night before. My son didn't even bother to come up with a plausible excuse. After Yvette's death, our relationship became even more strained. Gone was the buffer that mitigated conflict. Gone was the woman who loved us both enough to give us at least the appearance of a normal relationship. Now all that remained between us was money, the only thing Elliot was interested in with me. Returning to the present, I put the journal back in the drawer. Some memories are too painful to dwell on for long. The phone rings. The name Quentin Overholt, Pearl's son, pops up on the screen. "Good evening, Mr. Barrington." His voice sounds strained. "I apologize for the late call, but I think you should know. Your son came to Weatherby's office this afternoon. Malcolm Weatherby is my longtime lawyer, handling all legal aspects of the business. Quentin works at the same firm and secretly informs me of any attempts by Elliot to gain access to information about my assets. Has he asked you anything?" I ask, even though I already know the answer. "Anwar, about the terms of your will, inheritance rights, and the possibility of contesting the documents on the grounds of the testator's incapacity," Quentin says dryly, businesslike. "Mr. Weatherby did not provide any information, citing confidentiality. But Elliot was persistent, said he was concerned about your health and clarity of mind. This is it, the first step in the game I envisioned. Elliot's starting to prepare for a legal attack. Good night. Thanks for the information, Quentin. Keep me posted if there are any new visits." After the conversation, I walk over to the window. Evening Greenfield spreads out before me in a grid of lights. Somewhere out there, in an apartment building on the east side of town, lives my son, probably already celebrating his future victory over the out-of-his-mind old man. The next morning, I wake up at the usual time, but feel an unusual heaviness. Thoughts of Elliot are restless. Breakfast remains untouched, the tea cooling in the cup. I try to concentrate on the day ahead, but my thoughts keep returning to Quentin's call. In the shop, I mechanically perform the usual actions. Pearl notices my condition, but, with her usual tactfulness, asks no questions. She only pours me fresh tea and places a fresh scone from the bakery across the street on the table. A silent gesture of care that I appreciate more than any words. By noon, an email from Bertram arrives. Usually our correspondence is about antiques or mutual acquaintances, but today's subject is different. Strange call from your son. "Rowan, I hope you're doing well. Elliot called me yesterday asking about your health and behavior lately. Said something about strange decisions and unusual spending. I said, of course, that you were perfectly fine, both mentally and physically. He was clearly disappointed with my response. Be careful, my friend. Something tells me he's gathering evidence of your incapacity. Take care, B. The letter doesn't surprise me. Elliot is methodically interviewing everyone who has regular contact with me, gathering evidence for a future lawsuit, trying to find someone to corroborate his old man losing his mind story. He's out of luck. My real friends and colleagues know me too well and have observed Elliot's behavior for too long to believe his insinuations. But that won't stop him. His next step will probably be to try to bribe or intimidate those who are more vulnerable or less loyal. I thank Bertram for the information and assure him that I am in full control of the situation. That's not entirely true. No one can fully control the actions of a man willing to do anything for money, but I'm at least prepared for the battle ahead. After closing the shop, I don't go home as I usually do. Instead, I head to the office of Doris Winters, the notary I've been working with for the past 5 years. Doris is an energetic woman in her 60s, known for her integrity and integrity. She is one of the few people I have entrusted with complete information about my asset and ownership structure. Elliot came by yesterday, she says without preamble, as soon as I sit down across from her desk. He tried to charm me, called me Dear Doris, and spoke of his deep concern for your health. How did the charm work? I can't help smiling as I imagine the scene. He's too cocky to notice that a woman with 40 years of legal experience sees right through him, Doris snorts. But he was persistent, asked about the deeds to the country house, the will, the terms of the trusts, tried to hint that you were influenced by certain individuals, meaning, I take it, Pearl and Quentin. It's a new twist, but not unexpected. If you can't prove incapacity, you can try to prove undue influence by those concerned. A classic tactic in inheritance disputes. What did you tell him? What I should have told him, that all your documents are in order, drawn up in the presence of independent witnesses, and that any attempt to challenge them on the grounds of incapacity or undue influence would be a waste of time and money. Thank you, Doris. I appreciate your integrity. You're welcome, she smiled slightly. You know, he reminded me of other clients I've dealt with over the years. Kids who think their parents' property is already theirs by birthright. Whether they earned it or not, it doesn't matter how they intended to use it. All that matters is that it should be theirs. I nod. That's an accurate description of Elliot's mentality. He never looked at my possessions as the result of decades of labor, risk, and sacrifice. To him, it was always a guaranteed prize at the end of a game called Wait for the Old Man to Die. I updated the paperwork like you asked, Doris continued, holding out a folder to me. All the vulnerabilities are closed. The trust system has been double-checked by the best experts. If Elliot hires an army of lawyers, they still won't find a loophole. I thank her and take the papers. They're the result of years of work to protect what I've created from a man who wants to destroy it. Not out of malice, but out of carelessness and selfishness. Elliot doesn't appreciate the labor put into building a collection of antiques or a business. He sees only the monetary equivalent that can be quickly converted into entertainment and status purchases. Back home, I lock the new documents in the safe and pour myself a brandy. It's been a hard day, and tomorrow will probably be even harder. The phone rings again. This time it's Pearl. Mr. Barrington, I'm sorry to call you so late, but your son came into the shop after closing time today. He knocked on the door, and I didn't answer it, but I saw him through the glass. Then he had a long talk with Mr. Prescott from the antique store next door. Henry Prescott is a longtime competitor and detractor of mine. Our relationship soured years ago over a dispute over the authenticity of one painting. If Elliot is looking for witnesses to my supposed incapacity, Prescott will be happy to help, just out of petty revenge. Thanks for the information, Pearl. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. After the conversation, I sit in the dark for a long time, staring at the lights of the city outside the window. Events are moving faster than I expected. Elliot is acting decisively, methodically, with an unaccustomed organization. Something's pushed him into action. Maybe financial problems. Maybe pressure from his new wife. Maybe just impatience. I know his next move will be even more brazen. Maybe a direct confrontation. Maybe an attempt to gain formal custody of me through the courts. Either way, I have to be ready. Before I go to bed, I call my doctor, Dr. Lloyd, and arrange for a full medical exam. I need an official paper certifying that I'm of sound mind and sound judgment, a small precaution that could play a big part in the battle ahead. As I fall asleep, I think of Yvette. What would she say now? Would she continue to defend her son, make excuses for his actions? Or would she finally admit that our parenting methods had created a monster of selfishness and greed? I'll never know the answer, but somehow I'm sure even she would have been disappointed in what her sensitive boy had become. It had been a week since I had learned of Elliot's visits to Doris Winters and his conversation with Henry Prescott. All that week I had been waiting for my son's next move, but he had remained unusually silent. This was not a good sign. When Elliot goes quiet, it usually means he's up to something. Thursday morning began as usual. Up at 6, gymnastics, shower, leisurely breakfast, and reading the news. But at 8:30, when I was about to go out to the shop, the doorbell rang. An unfamiliar man in a gray suit with a leather briefcase in his hand stood on the doorstep. "Mr. Barrington, my name is Nathaniel Spears. I'm with the law firm of Spears, Morrison & Associates." He handed me a business card. "May I come in? I have some documents I need to discuss with you." I had never heard of such a firm, but I let him in. We went into the living room, and Mr. Spears sat in the chair opposite me. "Mr. Barrington, I represent your son, Elliot Barrington," he began, pulling a folder of papers from his briefcase. "I have a petition for the appointment of a guardian of your person and property on the grounds of alleged incapacity." He said it as casually as if he were reporting the weather. I silently took the documents and began to read them. The petition was well written and contained all the classic arguments: advanced age, alleged cognitive decline, poor financial decisions, and exposure to the influence of others. Several people were named as witnesses, including Henry Prescott and, to my surprise, Lorelei, Elliot's current wife. "Do you realize that this is slander?" I asked, handing back the papers. "I'm only performing my professional duties, Mr. Barrington," Spears shrugged. "My client is genuinely concerned about your condition and believes that you are no longer capable of making informed decisions about your assets." "My client is genuinely concerned about his access to my estate," I corrected him. "And you know it very well. How much did he pay you?" Spears blushed slightly but maintained a professional expression. "The court has scheduled a preliminary hearing in 2 weeks. You can hire a representative or appear in person. I'll leave the papers with you." He rose. "Good day, Mr. Barrington." As soon as the door closed behind him, I dialed the number of my lawyer. Malcolm Weatherby answered after the first beep. "Rowan? What's wrong?" "Elliot filed a petition for guardianship. A lawyer from Spears, Morrison & Associates just came to see me." Malcolm whistled quietly. "This is serious. Spears is an ambitious young lawyer, building a career on incapacity cases. He has a reputation for going to great lengths to win." "Don't worry, I'm on it. Do we have Dr. Lloyd's medical report?" "Yeah, he sent it over yesterday. Full workup, including cognitive tests, all above average for my age group." "That's great. That's going to be our big selling point. Don't worry, Rowan. We're going to win this battle. Your son just doesn't know who he's messing with." After talking to Malcolm, I called Pearl and told her I'd be later than usual today. I needed time to gather my thoughts and plan my next steps. Sitting down at my desk, I took out a notebook and began to draw up a list of necessary measures. The first step was to notify all the trustees of the legal process. Then I would gather additional evidence of my capacity: affidavits from business associates, clients, bankers with whom I interacted on a regular basis. I was just finishing the list when the phone rang. Elliot's name on the screen made me hesitate, but I answered. "Hi, Dad." His voice sounded unnaturally cheerful. "How are you feeling?" "Fine, thanks. Especially after your lawyer's visit," I replied dryly. "Was there anything else you wanted to tell me? Or was that just a courtesy call?" "Come on, Dad, it's just a formality. For your own good." He paused. "Actually, I'm calling about something else. I have some good news." "You do? What kind of good news?" "Remember when we talked about doing business together with Lorelei? Well, we found another source of funding. No credit or loans. It's all above board and legitimate. I sold a country house. I felt a cold wave run down my spine. The country house in the suburbs of Greenfield had been purchased by me 15 years ago as a vacation spot and an additional investment. Technically, the house was still in my name, but the actual ownership had been transferred through a complex system of trusts as long as 5 years ago. It couldn't be sold without my explicit consent. That's it, I said, trying to remain calm. And who was the buyer? Some construction company. They're planning to demolish the house and build a miniature golf club or something. Paid a very good price, I must say. Oh, I almost forgot, I also picked up your collector's car. That '56 Jaguar. Lorelei's client, a big vintage car fanatic, fell in love with it and offered me crazy money. He couldn't refuse. His every word was an elaborate provocation. He knew how much I cherished this car. A vintage Jaguar that I had restored with my own hands, spending years searching for original parts. Like the house, the car was legally protected from being sold without my direct involvement. Elliot, I said quietly but firmly, do you know exactly whose house and car this is? There was a pause. I could almost physically feel his confusion through the phone line. What do you mean? He finally asked. It's your house and your car. It always has been. Are you telling me you've checked the paperwork? Did you see the title deed in person? Or did you just assume that because I live there and drive that car, it must be mine? Of course I checked. His voice became irritated. They're registered to you. I saw the papers in your office when I visited last year. Those papers were just copies of old documents. I allowed myself a slight smile, though he couldn't see it. If you'd actually checked the actual property records, you'd know that the house had been owned by the Pearl Overholt Trust for the past 5 years, and the Jaguar's been registered to Quentin Overholt for 3 years. I'm just using the property out of their kindness. What? That's impossible. You're lying. See for yourself if you don't believe me. And by the way, when you explain the situation to your buyers, don't forget to mention that selling someone else's property without a power of attorney is fraud. A felony, by the way. I could hear Elliot breathing heavily. His plan was crumbling before my eyes. You couldn't have done it, he finally said. Why would you give your property to these people? They are nothing. They're just servants, employees. They are my friends and confidants. People who care for me not for money, but out of respect and affection. A concept I'm afraid you're completely unfamiliar with. This is nonsense. His voice broke into a shout. They're manipulating you, don't you see? They've somehow convinced you to give them everything that belongs to our family. That's exactly what I said in the petition. You're no longer capable of making rational decisions. That's an interesting interpretation, I said calmly, but the facts tell a different story. I didn't give them my assets, but created a system of trusts and contingent gifts that protect my assets from rash actions, including your attempts to embezzle them before their time. That's not fair. I'm your son, your sole heir. Biologically, yes, but in the last 20 years, you've never once shown the qualities I want to see in a man who will carry on my work. You've never any interest in business, any appreciation for the things I've collected, any respect for the labor that went into creating them. To you, my legacy is just a bag of money that can be quickly squandered on another whim. A long pause followed. I heard Elliot mutter something, perhaps consulting with someone nearby. Then his voice came back into the receiver, more controlled, almost threatening this time. You're going to regret this, old man. I'll contest every one of those trusts. Prove that you were incapacitated when you signed the papers. I'll bring in the best experts to prove you were manipulated. Neither Pearl nor her son will get a dime. You can try, I agreed. But be warned, all documents are drawn up by the best lawyers in the country, signed in the presence of independent witnesses, notarized. Examinations of my mental state were conducted regularly and documented. I've anticipated every move you've made, Elliot, every argument you could make, and I closed all the loopholes long before you even started thinking about them. This is war, he hissed. You've declared war on me, and I won't hold back. I'll make you regret it. The war didn't start today, son, and I didn't declare it. You attacked me years ago, with your indifference, your greed, your contempt for what matters to me. I just finally decided to defend myself. Elliot hung up the phone. I sat motionless, staring at the phone in my hand. A strange feeling of devastation and relief filled me at the same time. The masks were off. The pretense was over. Now the real battle was beginning. I called Malcolm Weatherby and told him about my conversation with Elliot. My lawyer whistled. Was he really trying to sell the trust's assets? This is serious, Rowan. If there's evidence, signed contracts, money orders, we can countercharge him with fraud. It would completely undermine his position in the guardianship case. I don't want to see him in jail, I admitted. Despite everything he's done, he's still my son. I understand, Malcolm sighed. But keep in mind that Elliot is cornered. And cornered people are dangerous. Be careful. After talking to the lawyer, I called Pearl and Quentin to alert them to the situation. They needed to know that Elliot now considered them personal enemies and might try to hurt them. I then contacted Bertram Hopper and other confidants. They all assured me of their support and promised to be on the lookout. I spent the day in the shop trying to concentrate on my work, but my thoughts kept returning to my conversation with my son in the morning. There was something new in his voice, not just irritation or frustration, but genuine hatred, as if my foresight, my protective measures, were a personal insult to him. Pearl was silent, but I could feel her anxiety. Finally, about 5 o'clock, she came to my desk. Mr. Barrington, she began uncertainly. Quentin says we should install additional security cameras in the shop and in your homes, just in case, and maybe hire security guards temporarily. Do you think Elliot might resort to violence? I looked at her questioningly. I don't know, she shook her head. But I saw the way he looked at you at Christmas dinner last year. It was the look of a man calculating something, evaluating, like you weren't a father, but an asset with a limited shelf life. Her words hit something inside me. I'd noticed that look myself, but I tried to ignore it. Now, in light of recent events, it had an ominous tinge to it. All right, I agreed. Let Quentin take care of it. And let's call it a night. Go home, get some rest. We have a big day ahead of us tomorrow. When I got home, I found the front door lock damaged. Someone had tried to break in, but luckily the state of the ART security system had worked. The double locks and reinforced jamb had withstood the attempted break-in. I immediately called the police. A young officer who arrived 20 minutes later thoroughly inspected the door and the surrounding area. He found shoe prints in the flower bed under the office window and a palm print on the glass. Looks like someone really wanted to get in, sir, he concluded, writing down the statement. Do you have any valuables that might have attracted the attention of the burglars? Jewelry, cash, artwork? There are some antiques in the house, but most of the real valuables are kept in special vaults, I answered. Most likely, this is not a random robbery attempt. Do you suspect someone, I wondered? Accusing my own son of attempted burglary was a serious step. Without direct evidence, it could look like a manifestation of senile paranoia, which would only play into Elliot's hands in the custody case. I have my assumptions, but I wouldn't want to make accusations without hard evidence, I replied evasively. The officer nodded, closing his notebook. I understand, sir. We'll increase patrols in the neighborhood in the coming days, and I would recommend you to install CCTV cameras if you haven't already done so. After the policeman left, I checked the house thoroughly. Everything was in place, no sign of forced entry. But the very fact that there had been an attempted break-in worried me. Elliot, and I was sure he had done it, was clearly looking for something specific. Perhaps property deeds or other papers that might help him in a lawsuit. I called Malcolm and told him what had happened. This is out of line, the lawyer said indignantly. Elliot is making one mistake after another. First, the fraudulent sale of someone else's property, now the attempted burglary. He's destroying his own position in the case. Or becoming desperate, I observed, and therefore even more dangerous. Maybe we should move to another place temporarily, Malcolm suggested. I have a guest house in the country. It's very private, with a good security system. I thanked him for the offer, but declined. Running away now would be a sign of weakness, and I couldn't afford to look weak, especially in Elliot's eyes. It would only encourage his aggression. I spent the evening reinforcing all the windows and doors, checking the alarm system, and making a list of things I needed to move to a safer place. First and foremost, documents proving my legal capacity and the legitimacy of all financial transactions of the last few years. Around 11 p.m., the phone rang again. This time the number was hidden, but I answered anyway. Listen to me carefully, old man. Elliot's voice sounded strange, almost inaudible. Maybe he was drunk or drugged. I know what you did. I know how you signed over everything to your minions. But it's not gonna change anything. I'm gonna get it all back, you hear me? Every dime of it. Elliot, calm down. I tried to keep my voice steady. Let's discuss this when you're in a clearer state of mind. Don't tell me what to do. He was almost shouting. You think you've outplayed me, don't you? You think you've got it all figured out, don't you? But you miscalculated. Now the countdown is on, okay? The countdown to your life of peace. I'm going to destroy everything that matters to you. Everything. Before I could respond, the connection was cut. I sat in the dark, clutching the phone in my hand. Elliot's words sounded like a direct threat. But a threat to what? My business? My friends? My life? In that moment, I was truly afraid for the first time. Not for myself, for the people I cared about. Pearl, Quentin, Bertram, all those who had the misfortune to be in the orbit of our family conflict. Elliot, in his rage, would only hurt them to get to me. I started calling everyone, warning them of the danger. Some answered right away, others called back later. By midnight, everyone was aware of the situation and had taken the necessary precautions. I spent the night without sleep, listening to every rustle. In the morning, I called the police and reported the threats. The officer who took the report took the matter seriously, especially after yesterday's attempted break-in. He promised that a patrol car would drive by the house regularly and advised him to apply to the court for a restraining order. The afternoon at the shop passed in tense anticipation. Pearl was pale but held firm. We both shuddered at the sound of the doorbell, expecting to see Elliot, but he did not appear. When I returned home in the evening, I found the power was out. When I called the power company, I learned that someone who identified himself as my son and had access to my personal information had requested the outage because of a supposedly planned move. It took several hours to restore power. It was a minor travesty, but it demonstrated Elliot's attitude. He was willing to do anything to inconvenience me and show his power. But I knew this was only the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. In the courtroom, where my legal capacity would be decided and, by extension, my control over whatever was left in my direct possession. I sat in the dark, waiting for the technicians from the power company to arrive, and thought about how Yvette and I could have made such a mistake. Where and when had we taken a wrong turn in raising our only son? What could we have done differently to raise a man with a conscience and principles instead of this greedy, vengeful stranger who now threatened to destroy everything I held dear? There were no answers, only the bitter realization that sometimes between parents and children lies a chasm that cannot be overcome by any love. No money, no concessions. And the only thing left is to protect what can still be protected from a person who was once a part of you, but now has become your worst enemy. The next few days were the beginning of the end for Elliot, though he didn't fully realize it yet. After his threats and attempted break-in, I decided that the time for half measures was over. It was time to act decisively. The morning began with a visit to Malcolm Weatherby. His office, located in an old building in Greenfield's business district, always gave me a sense of reliability and stability. Dark wood paneling, solid furniture, portraits of the firm's founders on the walls, all this created an atmosphere of confidence in the future. "Shall we proceed with Plan B?" Malcolm asked when we were alone in his office. I nodded. We'd developed Plan B a few years ago as a last resort in case Elliot crossed certain boundaries. Now those boundaries were not just crossed, but completely erased. "We'll start with financial isolation," Malcolm said, laying out the documents in front of him. "Cut off access to all joint accounts, revoke powers of attorney, revoke any authority you've ever granted Elliot. Then we'll move on to legal measures. A libel countersuit, a police report for attempted fraudulent sale of trust assets, a restraining order barring him from coming anywhere near you, your home, or your place of employment. What about the custody case? Preliminary hearing in 12 days. But don't worry, we have ironclad proof of your competency. Medical reports, witness testimony, recent business decisions that show clear thinking. Judge Holloway, the judge assigned to the case, is known to be skeptical of incapacity suits, especially when filed by concerned relatives. I signed a stack of documents authorizing Malcolm to act on my behalf in financial and legal matters related to Elliot. It was necessary to expedite the process and avoid possible accusations of a personal vendetta. "How do you think he'll react?" I asked, putting down the last signature. Malcolm rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "First shock, then anger. Perhaps an attempt at reconciliation when he realizes the extent of the problem. And then, if I'm judging his character correctly, desperate measures, perhaps new legal attacks, maybe even a public blackening of your reputation. Be prepared for foul play, Rowan." I nodded. Knowing Elliot, anything was to be expected. From Malcolm's office, I went straight to the bank. James Whitley, the manager of the local branch of First National, had been a client and friend of mine for over 20 years. He met me in his office, listened attentively to the situation, and without further question proceeded to carry out my orders. "So, freeze all joint accounts, block credit cards issued in the name of Elliot Barrington, but linked to your accounts, cancel all automatic payments in his favor." James listed, entering data into the computer. "Anything else?" "Yes, I want to be notified of any attempts to access these accounts, any requests for information, any activity linked to Elliot's name." "Will do. Although I have to say, it's pretty drastic, Rowan. Are you sure you want to go to that much aggravation? He's tried to sell assets that don't belong to him, threatened me and my loved ones, filed for a declaration of incapacity to gain control of my assets. I'd say the aggravation has already set in, and not on my initiative." James shook his head. "That's sad to hear. And yet, he's your son, Chidiyam. Biologically, yes. In every other way, he's a stranger I have to defend myself against." Next stop was the Greenfield Country Club, an elite establishment where Elliot liked to spend his time playing golf and networking with the rich and powerful of the town. I was one of the oldest members of the club, and my word carried weight. The conversation with the chairman of the board, Arthur Pemberton, was short and productive. "Of course, Rowan, we will cancel his guest membership. Given the circumstances, it's the least we can do. And rest assured that neither of us will testify against you in court if it comes to that." I thanked him and went on with my list. By the end of the day, Elliot was cut off from every financial resource I'd ever provided him. Bank accounts, credit cards, season tickets, club memberships, even a streaming service account that I was still paying for some reason. Everything that could have been blocked was blocked. Everything that could have been revoked was revoked. It didn't take long for the effect to wear off. Around 6 p.m., when I had already gotten home, my phone exploded with a furious ringing. "What have you done?" Elliot shouted, not bothering to say hello. "My card isn't working. I can't withdraw money. They won't let me into the club. What kind of game are you playing?" "No game," I replied calmly. "I'm just organizing my finances like a man of my age should, separating my assets from liabilities I no longer consider necessary." "You can't do that. That's financial abuse." I almost laughed at the absurdity of that statement. "Financial abuse? Elliot, you're a 40-year-old man. I don't have to pay your bills, sponsor your hobbies, or provide for your lifestyle. I've never had to. What I did before was a choice I've now reconsidered. You've put me in a terrible position. I don't even have money for gas. How am I supposed to pay my bills? The same way millions of people do every day, by working. It's an amazing concept, isn't it? You perform a useful function and someone pays you money to do it. You're a monster!" His voice shook with rage. "First you signed over the property to your minions. Now you're cutting me off from my livelihood. What's next? You're going to disinherit me?" "Oh, I wouldn't worry about inheritance if I were you. You have more pressing concerns, like how to explain to the people you sold my house and car to that you had no right to sell them, or how to pay your expensive lawyer, Mr. Spears, who I'm sure doesn't work for free." There was a pause, then a quiet, hate-filled, "You're going to regret this, old man. I swear you'll regret it." And the connection went dead. I put the phone away, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The situation was unfolding exactly as I'd foreseen, but it didn't feel good. Seeing your only child finally turn into the enemy is not what any parent dreams of. The next morning, I called a meeting of those I'd secretly believed Elliot to be my true heirs. We met not in a shop or at my house, both of which could have been under Elliot's supervision or the men he hired. but in a small conference room at the Windsor Hotel on the outskirts of town. The first to arrive was Pearl Overholt, punctual and collected as always. She was followed by her son Quentin, a young lawyer with a sharp mind and an impeccable reputation. Then came Bertram Hopper and his granddaughter Iris, a promising art historian. Last came Felix Chong, a talented restorer who had worked with me on several important projects, and Leonard Stevens, a former military historian and now an expert on antique weapons. All of these people were bound to me not only by business relationships, but also by shared values, a common passion for art and history, and a common understanding of the importance of preserving cultural heritage. I have secretly helped each of them over the years, paying for their education, providing startup capital for their businesses, opening doors in professional circles, and each has proven their worth not just with words of gratitude, but with real accomplishments in their field. Thank you all for coming. Despite the short notice, I began, as everyone settled around the table. As you know, the situation with my son has escalated to the extreme. He's filed a lawsuit to have me declared incompetent, tried to illegally sell property he no longer owns, and even resorted to direct threats. We've heard, Bertram nodded. It's a very unfortunate development. That's why I felt it necessary to call you all together and formally inform you of my plans. Each of you is already aware of your role in my will and the structure of the trust, but until now we have avoided discussing these topics openly for security reasons. Now circumstances have changed and we need to act in concert. I have handed out folders of documents detailing the structure of my estate and the role of everyone present in its future administration. Arnott, as you can see, the bulk of my business and collection will come under the management of a foundation after my death, in which each of you will play a role. Pearl will be the executive director, Quentin will be the legal advisor, Bertram will be the chief curator, and Iris will be his deputy and potential successor. Felix will be responsible for conservation and restoration, Leonard for research and publications. What about the current assets? Quentin asked. The shop, real estate, investments? The shop will continue to be run by Pearl, with Iris gradually taking over. The real estate will be partly sold, partly retained for the needs of the foundation. The investment portfolio will remain intact, with the proceeds going to fund the foundation's operations and scholarships for young researchers and restorers. I paused, looking at their attentive faces. But these are plans for the future. Right now, we need to focus on defending against Elliot's aggressive actions. He's already been denied access to my finances and some of the social privileges he enjoyed because of my position. This has enraged him, and I fear his next moves may be even more destructive. Shuriurakin, do you think he might try to harm any of us? Iris, the youngest person present, asked. I don't think he's capable of physical violence, I answered, though I wasn't entirely sure. But moral pressure, slander, attempts at bribery or intimidation are his style. So I ask you all to be vigilant, not to communicate with him without witnesses, to write down all contacts, and to report any suspicious behavior to me immediately. Everyone nodded in agreement. We discussed specific security measures, exchanged emergency contacts, and agreed to meet regularly for updates. After the formal part of the meeting was over, I asked Iris to stay behind. This bright young woman with a sharp mind and a deep understanding of art always reminded me of my wife, Yvette, when she was young. The same passion, the same attention to detail, the same indomitable energy. Iris, I have a special favor to ask of you, I said when we were alone. In the basement of my house is a collection of rare books that I've collected all my life. It's not listed in any official registry, and only a few close friends know about it. I want you to take it into your custody. Why now? She asked, raising her eyebrows in surprise. Because Elliot knows of its existence and its value. If he really wants to hurt me, he might try to destroy what's precious to me. This collection is a part of my soul, Iris. I'm entrusting it to you because I know you understand its value in more than just monetary terms. She nodded silently, and in her eyes I saw an understanding that I had never seen in Elliot's gaze. An understanding of the value of knowledge, of beauty, of the history contained in the fragile bindings of ancient folios. When I returned home after the meeting, I found that someone had broken a window in my study. Inside, everything had been turned upside down. Drawers pulled out, papers strewn about, bookshelves emptied. Clearly, someone had been looking for something specific, not caring about the safety of the rest. I immediately called the police. The officer who arrived, the same young man as last time, carefully examined the scene, photographed the damage, took fingerprints from the window frame. "Can you identify what's missing, sir?" "Namri," he asked, filling out the report. I looked around. At first glance, nothing of value was missing. The computer was still there, and so were the antiques I kept in my office. But many papers had clearly been looked through, and some folders had disappeared. Some documents seemed to be missing. "I need time to do a full inventory." "I understand. If you find anything, let me know right away." "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" "I've been thinking. On the one hand, everything pointed to Elliot. On the other, it was dangerous to make direct accusations without evidence, especially in light of the upcoming incapacity trial. I have my suspicions, but I'd rather wait for the results of your investigation." After the policeman left, I checked the office thoroughly and found that folders with copies of some trust documents, old letters from Yvette, and several photo albums had disappeared. Nothing critical since all the original documents were kept in a safe deposit box or with a notary, but the mere fact that my privacy had been invaded was deeply disturbing. I called Malcolm and told him what had happened. "It's a serious crime, Rowan," he said after a pause. "Burglary, home invasion, identity theft. If we can prove Elliot's involvement, it will completely discredit his position in court and could lead to criminal charges." "I don't want to see him in jail," I reiterated my position. "I understand how you feel, but the situation is escalating. He's moving from verbal threats to actual action. The next step could be physical violence. We have to stop him before anyone gets hurt." I agreed, although the thought of sending my own son to jail was agonizing. We agreed to install hidden cameras in and around the house so that we would have hard evidence in case of another break-in. The next day, I received a message from Leonard Stevens. Unknown persons had tried to break into his apartment during the night. The security system had worked, scaring the intruders away, but the incident had made him seriously fear for his safety. A few hours later, Pearl called. Someone had left a threatening note on the door of her house saying, "We know what you stole. Give it back or you'll be sorry." The handwriting didn't look like Elliot's, but the style was in keeping with his character of acting out of others' hands while remaining in the shadows. By evening, I had gathered new information. Felix Chong had received a strange call from a man claiming to be a journalist and inquiring about his special relationship with Mr. Barrington. Quentin Overholt had been stopped on the street by a woman who looked a lot like Lorelei and was trying to get the details of his work at a law firm. And Bertram Hopper had received an email offering a very lucrative deal in exchange for information about my business operations. My business operations. Elliot was acting on all fronts, using different methods to pressure each of my confidants. He was clearly trying to find a vulnerable link in the chain of people to whom I had entrusted my legacy. But he did not know the main point. These people were bound to me not only by business relationships, but also by sincere affection, shared values, and years of mutual respect and support. Something Elliot himself had never understood or appreciated. Human connections based not on profit, but on genuine common interests and mutual respect. I called an emergency meeting via video link to discuss the latest developments and coordinate our actions. Everyone looked tense but determined. "He's trying to intimidate us," Pearl said, adjusting her glasses. "But the more aggressive he gets, the more mistakes he makes. Every threat, every attempted break-in, every suspicious phone call is evidence that can be used against him." "Exactly," Quentin seconded her. "We have to document every incident, report it to the police, collect evidence. And the most important thing is not to give in to provocation, not to engage in direct confrontation." "What about the upcoming trial?" Iris asked. "Will all these incidents affect the judge's decision?" "Absolutely," replied Malcolm, who had joined our conference. "If we can prove that Elliot is waging an organized campaign to discredit Rowan and intimidate his entourage, it will completely undermine his position in the incapacity case. The judge will see his true motives, not concern for his father's well-being, but to gain control of his assets at any cost. We devised a plan of action, increase security measures, install surveillance cameras, report every suspicious incident to the police, document all contact with Elliot or his intermediaries, and prepare mental health affidavits for the upcoming trial. After wrapping up the meeting, I sat in front of the extinguished computer screen for a long time, pondering the strange twist of fate. These people who were not related to me by blood showed more care, devotion, and understanding than my own son. They saw me not just as a source of money or status, but as a person with values, knowledge, history, a person with whom they shared common interests and mutual respect. In a way, they were my real family, the one I chose myself, not the one I was born into. And for their sake, for the sake of preserving what we had built and valued together, I was willing to fight to the end, not backing down to Elliot's threats and provocations. The countdown of his carefree life had begun. Every day he sank deeper into his own greed and rage, cutting off his escape routes, burning the bridges that had once connected us, destroying the last vestiges of his father's love and patience. And I felt no joy at the sight, only a bitter determination to see it through to the end, defending what I believed in and those I trusted. The preliminary hearing was 5 days away. I sat in my office going over the reports from the private investigator Malcolm had hired to monitor Elliot. The reports painted a picture of a man on the brink of despair. My son had visited 4 law firms in the last week, 2 of which had refused to deal with him after learning of the circumstances. He has attempted to get loans from 3 different banks, but has been turned down everywhere due to his tainted credit history and lack of steady income. He was seen having lively arguments with Lorelei on the street and in the restaurant, which spoke of the tension in their relationship. On one occasion, he was seen leaving a pawn shop empty-handed, apparently trying to pawn something that didn't have enough value. The detective also noted that Elliot had become actively involved with people of dubious reputation, small-time crooks, fence smugglers, underground bookmakers. This information worried me the most. I knew that desperation could push a man to extreme measures, and I was afraid that Elliot might cross a dangerous line, beyond which a criminal offense began. A phone call rang. The number was unidentifiable, but I decided to answer it. Sorry, Mr. Barrington? The voice was unfamiliar, male, with a slight accent. My name is Rainer Duval. I represent Blue Horizon Investments. We're interested in purchasing some items from your collection. I had never heard of such a company, which in itself was suspicious. In a narrow circle of serious collectors and investors in antiques all know each other. What kind of objects are you interested in? In particular, your collection of medieval manuscripts and early printed books. Our client is prepared to offer a very generous sum, well above market value. Now I was sure it had something to do with Elliot. Very few people knew about my manuscript collection, and it was not publicly cataloged. Plus, an offer well above market value is always a red flag. And who is your client, Mr. Duval? A brief pause. I'm afraid I can't divulge that information at this stage. Confidentiality is very important to my client. I understand. Unfortunately, I don't consider offers from anonymous buyers, and my manuscript collection is not for sale. Perhaps you'll reconsider when you know the amount? There was a note of insistence in his voice. My client is prepared to offer $5 million in cash. The amount was indeed well above the real value of the collection, and offering cash is a clear sign of a dirty deal. My answer remains the same. The collection is not for sale. Good day, Mr. Duval. I hung up the phone and immediately called Iris to make sure the manuscripts that had been transported to her were safe. She assured me that everything was fine. The books were stored in a temperature and humidity controlled safe, and her apartment was equipped with a reliable security system. That same day, I received an email from someone named Sebastian Price, who introduced himself as a journalist who was supposedly writing an article about Greenfield antiques collectors. He asked for an interview and implied that he had already spoken to members of my family who had a lot of interesting things to say about my business practices. A clear attempt at blackmail. Elliot had apparently found someone willing to write a smear article based on his fabrications. I forwarded the letter to Malcolm, who promised to check whether such a journalist even existed and, if necessary, to take precautionary legal action. In the evening, there was another call, this time from Lorelei, Elliot's wife. Her voice sounded tense, hysterical. Mr. Barrington, we need to talk. Elliot, he's been acting strange. He's coming home late. He won't say anything. I found a gun in his things. A gun, you know? This news really alarmed me. Elliot had never been interested in guns, and as far as I knew, he wasn't licensed. Did you report it to the police? No! She seemed shocked at the idea. He's my husband. I can't. I just want this to stop. Couldn't you just give him some money? Enough so we can get out of here? Start over? I sighed. Lorelei was obviously scared, but I couldn't be sure this wasn't just another manipulation. Lorelei, if you're really concerned about your safety, go to the police. As for money, that avenue is closed. I'm willing to pay for Elliot's addiction treatment, if any, or psychotherapy, but direct financial support will only exacerbate the problems. You're a monster, she suddenly exclaimed, shifting from pleading to accusation. You've ruined our lives. Elliot is right about you. You're a ruthless, selfish old man who takes pleasure in manipulating people. Manipulating? Interesting characterization from a man who just tried to use fear for safety to bilk me out of money. She hung up without further comment. I called the detective and alerted him to Elliot's possible possession of a gun. That was a game changer. Now it wasn't just financial fraud or legal tricks, but a potential physical threat. The next morning, Pearl met me at the shop with an anxious expression on her face. Mr. Barrington, I saw Elliot on my way to work. He was standing in front of the building, and he was just, watching. Didn't approach, didn't say anything. Just watched. It was creepy. I nodded. Elliot was turning to intimidation tactics, trying to create an atmosphere of constant threat. Pearl and I checked the security cameras set up after the first incident, and we did indeed see Elliot standing across the street about 30 minutes before Pearl arrived. Just standing there looking at the building, just like she said. The recording was saved and sent to Malcolm as further proof of the harassment. We also reported the incident to the police, even though technically Elliot hadn't done anything illegal. In the afternoon, a letter arrived from Nathaniel Spears, Elliot's lawyer, offering an out-of-court settlement. The offer was surprisingly modest. Elliot would withdraw the incapacity suit in exchange for a lump sum payment of $100,000 and monthly maintenance of $5,000. A clear sign of desperation. Elliot's initial ambitions had obviously collided with reality. He had no chance of winning the incapacity case, and his financial situation was becoming increasingly critical. I discussed the offer with Malcolm, and we decided to decline it. Agreeing to any payment could be interpreted as an admission of some kind of guilt or obligation on my part, which would set a dangerous precedent. Toward evening, a visitor came into the shop whom I recognized at once, though I had seen him only in photographs. Randall Crane, one of Elliot's closest friends and his frequent companion in dubious business schemes. Mr. Barrington, he extended a hand, which I deliberately ignored. What an honor to finally meet you in person. Elliot has told me so much about you. Nothing good, I'm sure. I looked at him without a smile. To what do I owe this visit? Crane pretended to look at the antique clock display case before answering. Things have gotten out of hand, don't you think? Family feuds, lawsuits, accusations. It's not good for anyone. I thought maybe I could mediate. Mediate what? I crossed my arms across my chest. As I recall, you don't have a law degree, and you're not a member of our family. But I am a friend of Elliot's, and I can tell you that he's desperate. His marriage is falling apart. He's losing friends. Creditors are coming at him from all sides. And how is that supposed to affect my decision? Crane lowered his voice, leaning closer. Elliot got involved with dangerous people, borrowed money from people he'd rather not owe. If he can't pay back what he owes, the consequences will be unpleasant. Are you trying to threaten me, Mr. Crane? I remained calm, though I was growing uneasy inside. If Elliot really had borrowed money from criminal elements, the situation could get out of hand faster than I'd realized. No! He held up his hands in a protective gesture. I'm just explaining the situation. Elliot is cornered, and cornered people sometimes do rash things. I care about him, and I care about you. Your concern touched me deeply, I said dryly. But the decision remains the same. No money for Elliot. If he's in danger because of his debts, let him go to the police. And I suggest you do the same, if you're involved in these dubious loans. Crane shrugged, his mask of friendliness gone. I was trying to help. Remember that when things get really nasty. After he left, I immediately contacted Malcolm and the detective with the new information. If Elliot really owed money to criminal elements, it changed the strategy. Now it was not just to defend against his legal attacks, but also to prevent possible physical threats. The detective promised to check Elliot's connections and find out how serious his debts were, and to whom exactly he might owe debts. Malcolm suggested increasing security measures and even considering a temporary move to a more secure location. That same evening, on my way home, I was pulled over by a patrol officer. It turned out my house alarm had gone off and neighbors had called the police. I rushed home accompanied by the officer and discovered the front door had been broken into. Inside, the house looked like the aftermath of a hurricane: furniture overturned, paintings ripped off the walls, books strewn about, dishes broken. On the wall in the living room, red paint read, "This is just the beginning." A police officer called for backup, and soon the house was filled with officers collecting evidence and fixing the damage. Apparently, the vandalism had been committed no more than an hour ago, and the perpetrator had probably fled when he heard the alarm. I stood in the middle of the ruined living room, looking at the pictures of my late wife strewn across the floor, the shards of antique vases, the tattered books, and felt not so much anger as deep fatigue and sadness. What had my son gotten himself to if he was capable of such things? Or were these really the dangerous people Crane had spoken of? The next few days became a real ordeal. The police stepped up patrols of the neighborhood. I temporarily moved in with Bertram, and my confidants took extra security measures. But Elliot seemed to disappear, not answering his cell phone, not showing up at his usual places. Not even his lawyer could get in touch with him. On the eve of the court hearing, Spears informed Malcolm that he was withdrawing the incapacity claim because of his inability to contact his client for further instructions. This should have come as a relief, but instead it caused even more concern. Where is Elliot? What had happened to him? That evening of the same day, I received a call from the police. Elliot had been found in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, drunk and disoriented. They found a notebook with incoherent notes and a list of names, including mine and the names of all my confidants, with some kind of numbers against each one. He also had a gun, unregistered and apparently acquired illegally. Elliot was taken to the police station for a statement and medical examination. There it was found that he was under the influence of not only alcohol, but also drugs. They found traces of cocaine and antidepressants in his blood. I went to the station immediately, although Malcolm advised me to refrain from personal contact until all the circumstances were clear. But I had to see my son, to understand what was going on, to try to help if it wasn't too late. The Elliot I saw in the interrogation room only remotely resembled the elegant, well-groomed man he'd always tried to look like. Crumpled clothes, a few days unshavenness, inflamed eyes, trembling hands. He looked like a homeless man, not the man who had recently revolved in Greenfield's high society. "Why have you come?" he asked in a husky voice as I sat down across from him. "Did you come to admire your victory?" "I came to find out what's going on, Elliot. Where have you been? Why did you stop answering your cell phone? What do those lists and numbers mean?" He laughed, but it sounded more like a cough. "You wouldn't like the answer, Dad. Believe me, I wouldn't. Try explaining it to me. I'm here. I'm listening." Elliot looked at me with a long stare that was a mixture of hatred, despair, and something else. Perhaps the remnants of a child's need for his father's approval. "I wanted to destroy you," he said finally. "Not physically, no. Destroy everything that matters to you. Your reputation, your business, your precious confidants. I drew up a whole plan with numbers, dates, actions. I found people who could help for a price. I kept quiet, letting him talk. But you know what the funny thing is? I couldn't. Not because of morals or conscience, no. It just turned out that I didn't have the resources, the connections, or even friends willing to take a chance on me. All those people who smiled at me, drank my champagne, clapped me on the shoulder, they all disappeared as soon as they realized there was no more money." He laughed again, this time with obvious bitterness. "Lorelei left, said she didn't sign up for this life." Crane stopped answering the phone when he realized I couldn't pay him back. Even Spears, that pompous lawyer, politely hinted that he couldn't continue without payment. And Trevino. You know about Trevino? I nodded. His men found me, Elliot continued, rubbing his shoulder as if it hurt. Explained that a debt doesn't disappear just because I don't have the money. Suggested alternative ways of paying it off. You know what they were? I can guess, I said quietly. They wanted me to blackmail you, threaten you, maybe even physically harm you. If you still wouldn't pay, they'd, you know. I was desperate, Dad. I almost agreed. And then? He stopped talking, looking past me. Then what, Elliot? Then I realized I'd become exactly what you always thought I was. His voice grew quieter. Useless. A parasite. A man without dignity or principle. And you know what the worst part was? You were right. You were always right. I looked at the broken man in front of me and felt a strange mixture of bitter satisfaction and deep sadness. My plan had worked. Elliot had lost everything he'd hoped for. Money, status, support, even his illusions of self, importance. But the victory was Pyrrhic. In the process, I lost my son for good, and he lost himself. What now, Elliot? I asked after a long silence. I don't know, he shrugged. The police are talking about illegal possession of a weapon, possibly burglary and vandalism. Trevino still wants his money, and I've got nothing. No job, no home, no prospects. I can help with legal defense, I offered, and a rehab program if you really want to change. Elliot looked at me in surprise. Why? After everything I'd done? After all the threats? Because no matter what, you're my son, I answered. I won't give you money to live the way you used to. I won't let you manipulate me or threaten my loved ones, but I will help you get back on your feet if you're really willing to work on yourself. He lowered his eyes and I saw a tear roll down his cheek. I don't know if I can change, Dad. I really don't. No one knows for sure, I stood up, getting ready to leave. But trying is more than you've done so far. As I left the room, I felt a strange sense of relief. Not the joy of victory, not gloating over my enemy's downfall, but simply relief that the long, exhausting fight had finally come to an end. Elliot was defeated, but not destroyed. He still had a chance to start over, if he could find the strength to take it. And I could finally return to my life, to the people who shared my values, to the cause I loved. With the bittersweet satisfaction of justice restored, and the quiet sadness of what might have been if things had turned out differently. 3 months had passed since the day I'd seen Elliot at the police station. A lot has changed in that time. My son had avoided jail time thanks to a deal Malcolm had arranged, community service and a mandatory drug rehabilitation program in exchange for dropping the illegal gun charges. As for the debt to Trevino, I intervened, not out of pity for Elliot, but to protect my neighborhood from possible trouble. The debt was paid on the condition that Elliot would never again turn to such people for loans. Lorelei filed for divorce, taking the last valuables Elliot still had. His friends disappeared once they realized they could no longer take advantage of his generosity. He was left alone, living in a rented room on the outskirts of town and working part-time as a laborer for a construction company, the only place that would hire a man with a scandalous reputation. All this time, I had no direct contact with him, getting information through Malcolm and the police officer who was overseeing the deal. I had no desire to see my son, though I sometimes found myself wondering how he was coping with a new life so different from his old one. On a rainy October evening, I was sitting in my office working on the catalog for an upcoming exhibition when Pearl announced that Elliot wanted to see me. He was waiting in the reception area, soaking wet and, from her description, very tense. "Shall I let him in?" she asked anxiously. I hesitated. The meeting was inevitable sooner or later, but I'd rather choose the time myself. "Yes, let him in." Elliot looked different from the last time I'd seen him. The sickly pallor was gone, his eyes clearer, his movements more confident. The physical labor had taken its toll on his figure. His belly was gone, his shoulders broader, his hands rougher. But the main change was in his gaze. The mixture of arrogance and uncertainty was gone, replaced by something new, something I couldn't pinpoint. "Hello, Dad," he said, stopping at the door. "Can I come in?" I nodded, pointing to the chair across from the desk. He sat down, putting his tattered backpack on his lap. "You're looking better," I remarked. "Sobriety and physical labor work wonders," He tried to smile, but it was awkward. 3 months without alcohol and drugs, and 2 months on a construction site. It breaks bones, but it clears your brain. There was an awkward pause. We both didn't know how to continue the conversation after everything that had happened. "Why are you here, Elliot?" I finally asked. He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I need to know, Dad, to understand. Why did you do this to me? Why did you cut me off from everything, disinherit me, give to strangers what should have been mine? I'm entitled to at least an explanation." I looked at him for a long moment. There was still a grudge in his question, as if I had done something unfair to him, rather than protecting what I had created from destruction. "Do you really want to know?" I asked quietly. Are you ready to hear the truth, even if you don't like it?" "Yes," he nodded. "I want to understand, even if it hurts." I leaned back in my chair, gathering my thoughts. Where to begin a story that had lasted almost 40 years? "Do you remember the day of your mother's funeral?" I asked. Elliot tensed, clearly not expecting this beginning. "Of course I remember. I was late for the service. I had car trouble." "There was no car trouble, Elliot. You spent the night partying in Ibiza and barely made the morning flight. You lied to me. You lied to everyone at the funeral. But the truth got through to me anyway." His face flushed slightly, but he didn't deny it. "It was terrible of me, I agree. But did you disinherit me because of one offense?" "No, it wasn't one. It was the last straw, the moment when I finally realized that nothing was going to change. But it started much earlier." I stood up and walked over to the closet, pulling out a file folder. "You know what this is? The reports of the private investigator I hired when you were in college. Not to spy on you like you might think. To find out where the money I sent for your education was disappearing." I opened the folder and started listing. Parties in Miami when you were supposed to be in class. Expensive gifts for the girls you changed every month. Gambling. You lost $5,000 at the casino in one night. Money meant to pay for the semester. Drunken debauches, broken hotel rooms, bribing campus police to cover up incidents. Elliot listened with his eyes downcast. "I was young and stupid," he muttered. "Everyone makes mistakes at that age." "Mistakes, yes, but most people learn from them. You kept at it after college. All those business projects you asked for money for." I pulled out another folder. "Here are the reports on each of them. None of them lasted more than 6 months. Not one made even a minimal profit. You know why? Because they were just a front for your entertainment." "That's not true," he objected. "I did try. It's just that circumstances." "Circumstances?" I raised an eyebrow. "Or the fact that you were spending your investment capital on parties, designer clothes, and exotic travel instead of investing in business development?" "Elliot, I gave you chance after chance, hoping you'd grow up, start taking life seriously, learn to appreciate hard work and responsibility. But that didn't happen." I closed the files and went back to my desk. "When your mother got sick, I hoped it would be a turning point for you, that the sight of her suffering would make you reevaluate your life, your priorities, that you'd finally grow up." "I love Mom," Elliot said quietly. "It was hard to see her like that. So hard that you visited her in the hospital only 3 times during her 6 months of illness. So much so that the night before her funeral you partied in Ibiza." Elliot was silent, unable to find an answer. "After she died, I gave you one last chance," I continued. "I offered to work together, to explore a business that could be yours someday. You said yes, remember? You came to the shop for 2 weeks before you found an excuse to leave for an emergency meeting in Las Vegas. You came back from that meeting a month later, no money, but with another fiancé. Tamara," Elliot remembered. "She was a dancer. Exotic dancer. To use a euphemism," I corrected him. "The marriage lasted 4 months, cost me nearly $100,000 in wedding and divorce fees, and ended with her leaving you for a friend of yours. And even that didn't teach you anything." I stood up and walked to the window, watching the rain drumming on the glass. "After that, I made a decision. I realized that if I left you my fortune, you'd squander it in a few years, destroy my life's work, ruin my business, sell off my collection to random buyers, go bankrupt and be left with nothing. I couldn't let that happen, Elliot. Not just for my sake, but for the memory of your mother, who also put a part of her soul into what we created. And you decided to give it all away to strangers? Ah, there was a hint of bitterness in his voice. Pearl, Quentin, the others. They're not strangers, Elliot. They're people who share my values, who understand the importance of what I do, who are willing to carry on my work with the same respect and dedication that I've given it all my life. They have earned my trust not only with words but with deeds. And I haven't? He asked quietly. You never tried, I turned to him. You wanted money, status, comfort, but never the responsibility and labor that came with it. You saw me not as a father, but as an ATM machine in my business, not as a life's work, but as a source of funding for your entertainment. There was a long pause. Elliot sat with his head down, clearly digesting what he had heard. There's something else, I said finally. Something you don't know. Something that made my decision final. Elliot looked up, waiting for me to continue. A few days before she died, your mother asked to speak to me in private. She was very weak, but she insisted on being alone with me. And do you know what she said? I paused, remembering that difficult moment. She said, Rowan, I was wrong. All these years I've been protecting Elliot, making excuses for him, letting him escape the consequences of his actions. I thought I was doing it out of love, but I was actually hurting him. We raised a man who doesn't understand the value of work, of responsibility, of respect for others, and that's as much my fault as it is yours. I saw Elliot go pale. She couldn't have said that, he whispered. Mom always protected me. That's why her words carried so much weight. I walked back to the table and sat down. She asked me to correct her mistake, to not indulge you anymore, to not protect you from the consequences of your actions, to let you finally face real life. It was her last wish, and I promised to fulfill it. Elliot covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. I couldn't tell if he was crying or just trying to cope with his emotions. Why didn't you tell me about this before? He asked finally, not looking up. Before it came to this, would you have listened? I shook my head. You were sure I was just a cruel, avaricious old man who wanted to control you and rob you of your rightful inheritance. No explanation would change your mind until you face the consequences of your lifestyle yourself. Elliot raised his head, and I saw that his eyes were indeed moist. So what now? He asked. I've lost everything, hit rock bottom, realized my mistakes. Is this what you wanted? What's the next step in your plan? The next step is up to you, I answered. I'm not going to give you back your inheritance, if that's what you were hoping for. The decision has been made, the papers have been signed, and there's no changing that. But I'm ready to help you get on your feet, to pay for your education if you decide to study, to give you startup capital for your business if you have a serious idea. Not as a gift, but as an investment, with clear conditions and an expectation of return. After everything that's happened, you're still willing to give me a chance? His voice sounded distrustful. Not me, I shook my head. Sharonor, the Yvette Barrington Foundation, which I created to support talented and hardworking young people. It will be officially launched in a month's time. The foundation will give grants for education, startup capital for businesses, and funding for research projects. You can apply like any other candidate. It will be reviewed by a board of directors using the same criteria as everyone else. And who is on that board? Elliot asked with a touch of irony. Let me guess. Pearl, Quentin, Bertram, the rest of your trustees? Yes, and a few independent experts in various fields. People who know how to recognize true talent and drive. Elliot nodded slowly, accepting the information. And so I'm going to have to prove my worth to a committee that includes the people who took the place that was once meant for me? If you see the situation that way, it's unlikely your application will be successful, I said. It's not about proving value. It's about actually changing, finding your calling, creating something worthwhile instead of just consuming. Elliot was silent, obviously thinking about what he had heard. Then he unzipped his backpack and pulled out a tattered notebook. Do you know what this is? He asked, placing it on the table. My diary from the Rehabilitation Center. They made us write down our thoughts, feelings, memories, some kind of therapy. I started reluctantly, just to fulfill a program requirement, but gradually I got into it. I began to really analyze my life, my decisions, their consequences. He opened a notebook to one of the pages. Here is an entry made after the second week of the program. Realized today that I never really worked hard. Always looked for easy ways, quick fixes, instant gratification. Always expected others to solve my problems, pay my bills, fix my mistakes. That's not the life of an adult. It's parasitism. He flipped through a few pages. And here was the entry after a month of sobriety. For the first time, I thought about how my father felt when he saw me spending his money without appreciating its source. Money earned through years of labor, risk, sacrifice. I'm not sure I could forgive that to my child. Elliot closed the notebook and placed it on the table. I'm not asking for my inheritance back, Dad. I realize I don't deserve it and probably never will. I came here to tell you that you were right about everything, and that I'm sorry, not just for losing money and comfort, for letting you and Mom down, for wasting so many years, opportunities, trust. I stared at him, trying to determine how sincere his words were. Was this another manipulation? Is he trying to play on my feelings again to get what he wants? But something in his gaze, in his posture, in the tone of his voice spoke of a real change, not a complete transformation. Those things take time, but the first step on a long journey. Thank you for those words, I said at last. They are important to me. And if you are really serious about your desire to change, I would be happy to see your application to the foundation. No guarantees, no special conditions on a general basis. This will be your chance to prove that change is real. Elliot nodded, accepting my terms. There's something else, he said, hesitating a moment. I've started writing. Not just a diary, but something like a memoir or a confession. The story of a man who had everything and lost it because of his own stupidity and selfishness. The therapist says it's a good way to make sense of the past and find direction for the future. Sounds like a worthwhile project. I was genuinely surprised. Elliot had never shown an interest in literature or writing before. I don't know if anything worthwhile will come out of it, he shrugged. But it's the first thing I've done in a long time that I'm not doing for immediate gain. Just because it helps me to understand myself and maybe help others avoid similar mistakes. He stood up, getting ready to leave. Thanks for listening to me, Dad, and for the truth, even if it was painful. Yeah, I'll be in touch. I'm up too. Take care of yourself, Elliot, and remember, real change takes time and constant effort. Don't give up halfway through. He nodded and headed for the door. But before he left, he turned around. You know what's ironic? Now that I've lost all rights to your inheritance, I'm beginning to realize its true value for the first time. Not in money or status, but in the hard work, the dedication, the passion for the cause you devoted your life to. In the legacy a person leaves behind, in the lives they have made a difference. With those words, he walked out, leaving me pensive. I went to the window and watched him cross the street in the rain, slouching and lifting the collar of his tattered jacket. So unlike the cocky, glossy man he'd been a few months ago. Broken, but perhaps finally finding his way to real adulthood. Turning back to the table, I noticed the notebook he'd forgotten. Had he left it behind intentionally or accidentally? I didn't open it, respecting his privacy, but put it in the desk drawer to return the next time I saw him, if there was one. That evening, I called Pearl, Quentin, Bertram, and the rest of the future board of directors of the Yvette Barrington Foundation. We discussed the final preparations for the official opening, the criteria for selecting candidates, and the application process. Do you think Elliot will actually apply? How many years? Iris asked when the formal part of the discussion was over. I don't know, I answered honestly. And I don't know if he's ready to do some serious work on himself and his future. But if he is, his application should be considered fairly, according to the same criteria as everyone else's. Everyone agreed to that principle. No favors, no prejudice, just an honest assessment of each candidate's ideas, plans, and potential. After the conversation, I sat in the silence of the office for a long time, reflecting on the strange twists and turns of fate. Not long ago, I was sure that Elliot was hopeless, that all my efforts to raise him were in vain, that he would never change. Now there was a tiny flame of hope somewhere deep inside, not for the return of the old relationship. Too much pain and betrayal stood between us, but for the possibility of a new one, based not on financial dependence, but on mutual respect and recognition of past mistakes. Taking the photograph of Yvette that stood on the table, I said quietly, "I've done all I can, darling. The rest is up to him." And it seemed to me that her smile in the photograph became a little warmer, as if she approved of my words and decisions. Like she was saying, "You're right, Rowan. You've kept your promise. Now let our son choose his own path." I put the photograph back in its place and went back to work on the exhibition catalog. Life went on, with new projects, new people, new opportunities, and with a sense of accomplishment to myself, to Yvette's memory, and to my life's work, which was now secure and had every chance of flourishing for years after me.